Welcome to Thueringer for Farming Simulator 15. We now continue in our reading of The Octopus, A Story of California by Frank Norris, Chapter 2. Now it was down to 87. It was at that figure the crop had sold that year, and to think that the governor had seen wheat at $2.05 in the year of the Turco-Russian War. He turned back to the house after giving Phelps final directions, gloomy, disheartened, his hands deep in his pockets, wondering what was to be the outcome. So narrow had the margin of profit shrunk that a dry season meant bankruptcy to the smaller farmers throughout all the valley. He knew very well how widespread had been the distress the last 2 years. With their own tenants on Los Muertos, affairs had reached the stage of desperation. Derek had practically been obliged to carry Hooven and some of the others. The governor himself had made almost nothing during the last season, a third year like the last, with the price steadily sagging and nothing else but ruin. But here he checked himself. 2 consecutive dry seasons in California were almost unprecedented. A third would be beyond belief. And the complete rest for nearly all the land was a compensation. They had made no money, that was true, but they had lost none. Thank God the homestead was free of mortgage. One good season would more than make up the difference. He was in a better mood by the time he reached the driveway that led up to the ranch house, and as he raised his eyes toward the house itself, he could not but feel that the sight of his home was cheering. The ranch house was set in a great grove of eucalyptus, oak, and cypress, enormous trees growing from out a lawn that was as green, as fresh, and as well-groomed as any in a garden in the city. This lawn flanked all one side of the house, and it was on this side that the family elected to spend most of its time. The other side, looking out upon the home ranch toward Bonneville and the railroad, was but little used. A deep porch ran the whole length of the house here, and in the lower branches of a live oak near the steps, Heron had built a little summer house for his mother. To the left of the ranch house itself, toward the county road, was the bunkhouse and kitchen for some of the hands. From the steps of the porch, the view to the southward expanded to infinity. There was not so much as a twig to obstruct the view. In one leap, the eye reached the fine, delicate line where earth and sky met, miles away. The flat monotony of the land, clean of fencing, was broken by one spot only, the roof of the division superintendent's house on 3, a mere speck, just darker than the ground. Cutter's house on 4 was not even in sight. That was below the horizon. As Heron came up, he saw his mother at breakfast. The table had been set on the porch, and Mrs. Derrick, stirring her coffee with one hand, held open with the other the pages of Walter Patter's Marius. At her feet, Princess Nathalie, the white Angora cat, sleek, overfed, self-centered, sat on her haunches, industriously licking at the white fur of her breast, while near at hand, by the railing of the porch, Presley pottered with a new bicycle lamp, filling it with oil, adjusting the wicks. Heron kissed his mother and sat down in a wicker chair on the porch, removing his hat, running his fingers through his yellow hair. Magnus Eric's wife looked hardly old enough to be the mother of 2 such big fellows as Heron and Lyman Derrick. She was not far into the 50s, and her brown hair still retained much of its brightness. She could yet be called pretty. Her eyes were large and easily assumed a look of inquiry and innocence, such as one might expect to see in a young girl. By disposition, she was retiring. She easily obliterated herself. She was not made for the harshness of the world, and yet she had known these harshnesses in her younger days. Magnus had married her when she was 21 years old, at a time when she was a graduate of some years standing from the state normal school and was teaching literature, music, and penmanship in a seminary in the town of Marysville. She overworked herself here continually, loathing the strain of teaching, yet clinging to it with a tenacity born of the knowledge that it was her only means of support. Both her parents were dead. She was dependent upon herself. Her one ambition was to see Italy and the Bay of Naples. The marble faun, Raphael's Madonnas, and Il Trovatore were her beau ideals of literature and art. She dreamed of Italy, Rome, Naples, and the world's great art centers. But there was no doubt that her affair with Magnus had been a love match. But Annie Payne would have loved any man who would have taken her out of the droning, heartbreaking routine of the class and music room. She had followed his fortunes unquestioningly, first at Sacramento during the turmoil of his political career, later on at Placerville in El Dorado County, after Derek had interested himself in the Corpus Christi group of mines, and finally at Los Muertos, where, after selling out his fourth interest in Corpus Christi, he had turned rancher and had come in on the new tracts of wheat land just thrown open by the railroad. She had lived here now for nearly 10 years, but never for one moment since the time her glance first lost itself in the unbroken immensity of the ranches had she known a moment's content. Continually there came into her pretty wide-open eyes, the eyes of a young doe, a look of uneasiness, of distrust, and aversion. Los Muertos frightened her. She remembered her young girlhood passed on a farm in eastern Ohio, 500 acres neatly partitioned into the water lot, the cow pasture, the corn lot, the barley field, and the wheat farm, cozy, comfortable, home-like, where the farmers loved their land, caressing it, coaxing it, nourishing it as though it were a thing almost conscious, where the seed was sown by hand, and a single 2-horse plow was sufficient for the entire farm, where the scythe sufficed to cut the harvest, and the grain was thrashed with flails. But this new order of things, a ranch bounded only by the horizons, where as far as one could see, to the north, to the east, to the south, and to the west, was all one holding, a principality ruled with iron and steam, bullied into a yield of 350,000 bushels, where even when the land was resting, unplowed, unharrowed, and unsown, the wheat came up, troubled her, and even at times filled her with an undefinable terror. To her mind, there was something inordinate about it all, something almost unnatural. The direct brutality of 10,000 acres of wheat, nothing but wheat as far as the eye could see, stunned her a little. The one-time writing teacher of a young lady seminary, with her pretty deer-like eyes and delicate fingers, shrank from it. She did not want to look at so much wheat. There was something vaguely indecent in the sight, this food of the people, this elemental force, this basic energy weltering here under the sun in all the unconscious nakedness of a sprawling primordial titan. The monotony of the ranch ate into her heart hour by hour, year by year, and with it all, when was she to see Rome, Italy, and the Bay of Naples? It was a different prospect, truly. Magnus had given her his promise that once the ranch was well established, they too should travel. But continually he had been obliged to put her off, now for one reason, now for another. The machine would not as yet run of itself. He must still feel his hand upon the lever. Next year, perhaps, when wheat should go to 90, or the rains were good. She did not insist. She obliterated herself, only allowing from time to time her pretty questioning eyes to meet his. In the meantime, she retired within herself. She surrounded herself with books. Her taste was of the delicacy of point lace. She knew her Austin Dobson by heart. She read poems, essays, the ideas of the seminary of Marysville persisting in her mind. Marius the Epicurean, the essays of Elia, Sesame and Lilies, the Stones of Venice, and the little toy magazines full of the flaccid banalities of the minor poets were continually in her hands. When Presley had appeared on Los Muertos, she had welcomed his arrival with delight. Here at last was a congenial spirit. She looked forward to long conversations with the young man on literature, art, and ethics. But Presley had disappointed her. That he, outside of his few chosen deities, should care little for literature shocked her beyond words. His indifference to style, to elegant English, was a positive affront. His savage abuse and open ridicule of the neatly phrased rondeaux and sestinas and chansonettes of the little magazines was to her mind a wanton and uncalled for cruelty. She found his Homer, with its slaughters and hecatombs and barbaric feastings and headstrong passions, violent and coarse. She could not see with him any romance, any poetry in the life around her. She looked at Italy for that. His Song of the West, which only once, incoherent and fierce, he had tried to explain to her, its swift, tumultuous life, its truth, its nobility and savagery, its heroism and obscenity, had revolted her. "But Presley," she had murmured, "that is not literature." "No," he had cried between his teeth, "no, thank God, it is not." A little later, one of the stablemen brought the buggy with a team of bays up to the steps of the porch, and Heron, putting on a different coat and a black hat, took himself off to Guadalajara. The morning was fine. There was no cloud in the sky, but as Heron's buggy drew away from the grove of trees about the ranch house, emerging into the open country on either side of the lower road, he caught himself looking sharply at the sky and the faint line of hills beyond the Quinsabe ranch. There was a certain indefinite cast to the landscape that to Heron's eye was not to be mistaken. Rain, the first of the season, was not far off. "That's good," he muttered, touching the bays with the whip. "We can't get our plows to hand any too soon." These plows Magnus Derrick had ordered from an Eastern manufacturer some months before, since he was dissatisfied with the results obtained from the ones he had used hitherto, which were of local make. However, there had been exasperating and unexpected delays in their shipment. Magnus and Heron both had counted upon having the plows in their implement barns that very week, but a tracer sent after them had only resulted in locating them still en route somewhere between the Needles and Bakersfield. Now there was likelihood of rain within the week. Plowing could be undertaken immediately afterward, so soon as the ground was softened, but there was a fair chance that the ranch would lie idle for want of proper machinery. It was 10 minutes before train time when Heron reached the depot at Guadalajara. The San Francisco papers of the preceding day had arrived on an earlier train. He bought a couple from the station agent and looked them over till a distant and prolonged whistle announced the approach of the town train. In one of the 4 passengers that alighted from the train, he recognized his father. He half rose in his seat, whistling shrilly between his teeth, waving his hand, and Magnus Derrick, catching sight of him, came forward quickly. Magnus, the governor, was all of 6 feet tall, and though now well toward his 60th year, was as erect as an officer of cavalry. He was broad in proportion, a fine, commanding figure, imposing an immediate respect. impressing one with a sense of gravity, of dignity, and a certain pride of race. He was smooth-shaven, thin-lipped, with a broad chin and a prominent hawk-like nose, the characteristic of the family, thin with a high bridge such as one sees in the later portraits of the Duke of Wellington. His hair was thick and iron gray, and had a tendency to curl in a forward direction just in front of his ears. He wore a top hat of gray with a wide brim and a frock coat, and carried a cane with a yellowed ivory head. As a young man, it had been his ambition to represent his native state, North Carolina, in the United States Senate. Calhoun was his great man, but in 2 successive campaigns he had been defeated. His career checked in this direction. He had come to California in the 50s. He had known and had been the intimate friend of such men as Terry, Broderick, General Baker, Lick, Alvarado, Emmerich, Larkin, and above all of the unfortunate and misunderstood Ralston. Once he had been put forward as a Democratic candidate for governor, but failed of election. After this, Magnus had definitely abandoned politics and invested all his money in the Corpus Christi mines. Then he had sold out his interest at a small profit just in time to miss his chance of becoming a multi-millionaire in the Comstock boom, and was looking for reinvestments in other lines when the news that wheat had been discovered in California was passed from mouth to mouth. Practically, it amounted to a hit discovery. Dr. Glenn's first harvest of wheat in Colusa County, quietly undertaken, but suddenly realized with dramatic abruptness, gave a new matter for reflection to the thinking men of the New West. California suddenly leaped unheralded into the world's markets as a competitor in wheat production. In a few years, her output of wheat exceeded the value of her output of gold, and when, later on, the Pacific and Southwestern Railroad threw open to settlers the rich lands of Tulare County, conceded to the corporation by the government as a bonus for the construction of the road, Magnus had been quick to seize the opportunity and had taken up the 10,000 acres of Los Muertos. Wherever he had gone, Magnus had taken his family with him. Lyman had been born at Sacramento during the turmoil and excitement of Derrick's campaign for governor, and Heron at Shingle Springs in El Dorado County 6 years later. But Magnus was, in every sense, the prominent man. In whatever circle he moved, he was the chief figure. Instinctively, other men looked to him as the leader. He himself was proud of this distinction. He assumed the grand manner very easily and carried it well. As a public speaker, he was one of the last of the followers of the old school of orators. He even carried the diction and manner of the rostrum into private life. It was said of him that his most colloquial conversation could be taken down in shorthand and read off as an admirable specimen of pure, well-chosen English. He loved to do things upon a grand scale, to preside, to dominate. In his good humor, there was something Jovian. When angry, everybody around him trembled. But he had not the genius for detail, was not patient. The certain grandiose lavishness of his disposition occupied him itself more with results than with means. He was always ready to take chances, to hazard everything on the hopes of colossal returns. In the mining days of Placerville, there was no more redoubtable poker player in the county. He had been as lucky in his mines as in his gambling, sinking shafts and tunneling in violation of expert theory, and finding pay in every case. Without knowing it, he allowed himself to work his ranch much as if he was still working his mine. The old-time spirit of '49, haphazard, unscientific, persisted in his mind. Everything was a gamble. Who took the greatest chances was most apt to be the greatest winner. The idea of manuring Los Muertos, of husbanding his great resources, he would have scouted as niggardly, Hebraic, ungenerous. Magnus climbed into the buggy, helping himself with Heron's outstretched hand, which he still held. The two were immensely fond of each other, proud of each other. They were constantly together, and Magnus kept no secrets from his favorite son. "Well, boy." "Well, Governor." "I am very pleased you came yourself, Heron. I feared that you might be too busy and send Phelps." It was thoughtful. Heron was about to reply, but at that moment Magnus caught sight of the 3 flat cars loaded with bright painted farming machines, which still remained on the siding above the station. He laid his hands on the reins, and Heron checked the team. "Heron," observed Magnus, fixing the machinery with a judicial frown. "Heron, those look singularly like our plows. Drive over, boy." The train had by this time gone on its way, and Heron brought the team up to the siding. "Ah, I was right," said the governor. "Magnus Derrick Los Muertos, Bonneville, from Ditson and Company, Rochester. These are ours, boy." Heron breathed a sigh of relief. "Ah, at last," he answered, "and just in time, too. We'll have rain before the week is out. I think, now that I am here, I will telephone Phelps to send the wagon right down for these. I start a blue stoning today." Magnus nodded a grave approval. "That was shrewd, boy. As to the rain, I think you are well informed. We will have an early season. The plows have arrived at a happy moment." "It means money to us, Governor," remarked Heron. But as he turned the horses to allow his father to get into the buggy again, the two were surprised to hear a thick, throaty voice wishing them good morning, and turning about were aware of S. Behrman, who had come up while they were examining the plows. Heron's eyes flashed on the instant, and through his nostrils he drew a sharp, quick breath, while a certain rigor of carriage stiffened the set of Magnus Derrick's shoulders and back. Magnus had not yet got into the buggy, but stood with the team between him and S. Behrman, eyeing him calmly across the horses' backs. S. Behrman came around to the other side of the buggy and faced Magnus. He was a large, fat man with a great stomach. His cheek and the upper part of his thick neck ran together to form a great, tremulous jowl. Shaven and blue-gray in color, a roll of fat, sprinkled with sparse hair, moist with perspiration, protruded over the back of his collar. He wore a heavy black mustache. On his head was a round-topped hat of stiff brown straw, highly varnished. A light brown linen vest, stamped with innumerable interlocked horseshoes, covered his protuberant stomach, upon which a heavy watch chain of hollow links rose and fell with his difficult breathing, clinking against the vest buttons of his imitation mother of pearl. S. Behrman was the banker of Bonneville, but besides this, he was many other things. He was a real estate agent. He bought grain. He dealt in mortgages. He was one of the local political bosses, but more important than all this, he was a representative of the Pacific and Southwestern Railroad in that section of Tulare County. The railroad did little business in that part of the country that S. Behrman did not supervise, from the consignment of a shipment of wheat to the management of a damaged suit, or even to the repair and maintenance of the right-of-way. During the time when the ranchers of the county were fighting the grain rate case, S. Behrman had been much in evidence in and about the San Francisco courtrooms and the lobby of the legislature in Sacramento. He had returned to Bonneville only recently, a decision adverse to the ranchers being foreseen. The position he occupied on the salary list of the Pacific and Southwestern could not be readily defined, for he was neither freight agent, passenger agent, attorney, real estate broker, nor political servant, though his influence in all these offices was undoubted and enormous. But for all that, the ranchers about Bonneville knew whom to look to as a source of trouble. There was no denying the fact that for Osterman, Broderson, Annixter, and Derrick, S. Behrman was the railroad. "Mr. Derrick, good morning," he cried as he came up. "Good morning, Heron. Glad to see you back, Mr. Derrick." He held out a thick hand. Magnus, head and shoulders above the other, tall, thin, erect, looked down upon S. Behrman, inclining his head, failing to see his extended hand. "Good morning, sir," he observed, and waited for S. Behrman's further speech. "Well, Mr. Derrick," continued S. Behrman, wiping the back of his neck with a handkerchief, "I was in the city papers yesterday that our case had gone against you." "I guess it wasn't any great news to you," commented Heron, his face scarlet. "I guess you knew which way Olstein was going to jump after your very first interview with him. You don't like to be surprised in this sort of thing, S. Behrman." "Now, you know better than that, Heron," remonstrated S. Behrman blandly. "Now, I know what you mean to imply, but I ain't going to let it get me mad. I wanted to say to your governor, I wanted to say to you, Mr. Derrick, as one man to another, letting alone for the minute that we were on opposite sides of the case, and that I'm sorry you didn't win. Your side made a good fight, but it was in a mistaken cause. That's the whole trouble. Why, you could have figured out before you ever went into the case that such rates are confiscation of property. You must allow the railroad a fair interest on the investment. You don't want us to go into the receiver's hands, do you now, Mr. Derrick?" "The Board of Railroad Commissioners was bought," remarked Magnus sharply, a keen, brisk flash glinting in his eye. "It was part of the game," put in Heron, "for the Railroad Commission to cut rates to a ridiculous figure, far below a reasonable figure, just so that it would be confiscation. Whether Olstein is a tool of yours or not, he had to put the rates back to what they were originally." "If you enforce those rates, Mr. Heron," returned S. Behrman calmly, "we wouldn't be able to earn sufficient money to meet operating expenses or fixed charges, to say nothing of a surplus left over to pay dividends. Tell me when the P&SW ever paid dividends. The lowest rates," continued S. Behrman, "that the legislature can establish must be such as will secure us a fair interest on our investment." "Well, what's your standard? Come, let's hear it. Who is to say what's a fair rate? The railroad has its own notions of fairness sometimes." "The laws of the state," returned S. Behrman, "fix the rate of interest at 7%. That's a good enough standard for us. There is no reason, Mr. Heron, why $1 invested in a railroad should not earn as much as $1 represented by a promissory note, 7%. But applying your schedule of rates, we would not earn a cent. We would be bankrupt." "Interest on your investment," cried Heron, furious. "It's fine to talk about fair interest. I know and you know that the total earnings of the P&SW, their main branch and lease lines for last year, was between 19 and 20 millions of dollars. Do you mean to say that the $20 million is 7% of the original cost of the road?" S. Behrman spread out his hands, smiling. "That was the gross, not the net figure, and how can you tell what was the original cost of the road?" "Ah, that is just it," shouted Heron, emphasizing each word with a blow of his fist upon his knee, his eyes sparkling. "You take cursed good care that we don't know anything about the original cost of the road. But we know that you are bonded for treble your value. We know this, that the road could have been built for $54,000 per mile, and then you say it cost $87,000. It makes a difference, S. Behrman, on which of these two figures you are basing your 7%. That all may show obstinacy, Heron, observed S. Behrman vaguely, but it don't show common sense. We are threshing out old straw, I believe, gentlemen, remarked Magnus. The question was thoroughly sifted in the courts. Quite right, assented S. Behrman. The best way is that the railroad and the farmer understand each other and get along peaceably. We are both dependent on each other. Your plows, I believe, Mr. Derrick. S. Behrman nodded toward the flat cars. They are consigned to me, admitted Magnus. It looks a trifle like rain, observed S. Behrman, easing his neck and jowl in his limp collar. I suppose you will want to begin plowing next week. Possibly, said Magnus. I'll see that your plows are hurried through for you then, Mr. Derrick. We will route them by fast freight for you, and it won't cost you anything extra.